Morning everyone, and we'll start the webinar. So my name is Johan now, I'm the CTO of Open Spatial, and we also have Colin Hobson, the CEO online, and we'll be talking about tracking, viewing and reporting historic data changes with Munsys Lineage and Enlighten. So our agenda is we're going to look at what is Lineage, how does it work, how do you set it up. We're going to look at Lineage in Munsys and then automated data aggregation for reporting, and then reporting in Lineage use Munsys and Enlighten and also with Power BI. And so we'll start to show you some of the results fairly early on, and then we will go into the nitty-gritty of how does it work, how do you set it up, etc. So more on the practical side. So what is data lineage? Data lineage is the process of recording and tracking the flow of data over time. So that is what that is doing. So recording and tracking, and that is to provide a clear understanding of where the data originated, how it has changed, and the ultimate destination within the data pipeline. So that's IBM's definition of lineage that they have in one of their products. And our part of that is lineage is a fundamental part of your provable data quality, and that's why we've got this entire process in place. So from a Munsys perspective, Lineage is a data management tool to monitor, archive and report changes to the data records in the spatial tables. It's an unattended process that happens in the background without user intervention. So it's a set and forget and get the results over time. It uses database triggers and scheduled tasks to perform transaction tracking and automated recording and aggregation of the data. So why Lineage? So it's basically what has changed. Show me what has changed on a map. How do you report on the changes? What the users have changed, and set up the automated reports of the changes. So I'm going to hand over to Colin, and he's going to show us on an actual client data set of their changes and edits and practical results of that. So over to you, Colin.
Yeah, thank you, Johan. I've got to share my screen. You should be seeing an Enlighten map. These folks are just a couple of weeks off upgrading to Enlighten 5, but the Lineage functionality I'll show you is the same, so you can look at that as well. So what I'm going to do is just show you, well, what's the results? What's the purpose of doing this? To make it clear, we'll just focus on their data. This particular customer does sewer and storm, and I will turn off the aerial photo so you can just see that. So if I just turn on the sewer network, you'll see this city here. So all of this stuff is mapped in Munsys for the sewer and storm, and you can see the regular Enlighten stuff with tooltips, etc. So what Lineage allows you to do is say, in their instance, they've been running Lineage since 2017, although what we're only going to show now on the map is since 2022. But down here, you'll see we've added onto the layers Lineage history for the sewer nodes and gravity pipes. So if I turn on Lineage for gravity pipes, this will literally be all pipes that have had a change made to them since 2022 on the map right there. So this allows you immediately to say, okay, let me see what has changed there, and I'll come back to that in a minute. You can go into more detail because what we're doing with Lineage, it's a full transaction. So we know not only who changed what, when they changed it, we know exactly what value was changed and what property. So you can go in and look at, well, where are the gravity pipes where inverts were changed? So literally there's only like 2 of them on there. So let me turn on a one. So these would be ones that have been moved in terms of length. Looks like the zoom state is not there, but that's, I'll just pop that out. And then also go into any of these. So this is just filters on the data. And so if we come in here, we can go in, I'll zoom right down to a small little area where we have actual results, and I'll turn on the nodes as well. So this would be any of the manholes, etc. So I know down here, they were doing a little bit of new work. And as you zoom in, you can see this is the sewer network there. And what we've got going on there is a set of functions. So all this is a layer that is pulling out the full transactions. And so when you want to see that, simply to say, well, this thing has changed, yes or no, that's easy enough. And then also to just actually looking here, because the sewer gravity pipes is turned off, and that was just bothering me big time there. Let me just turn the lineage thing off here just for a minute. So this is their standard data. This would be, with tooltips, everything else. The question you really want is what's changed. So with every single one of these features, we do have a setup here where they've got a lineage date. So what that lineage date is literally when the last change was made. So down here you'll see this is new stuff added this year. That's just the most recent change. We actually want to know more than that. And you'll see we can actually drill down all the way to the changes on that pipe given over time, and you can look at the change history. And I'll actually do that from the single layer here because it's a little cleaner. And I'll turn off the sewer pipe here just for now, and just so that I select them easily enough. So this particular pipe here has got lineage on it. And if I look at the tooltip, what we've done is aggregate the changes on any one of these pipes. So this one has the columns, the most recent change we just found, and it has the columns of geom length, the start invert elevation, and if you go and look at others, they've got various different things on them. So this has got end elevation, geom length, and start elevation. And so you can see there's stuff that's been changed on that particular pipe. If you select any given one, you can drill down on the advanced form. So what we'll do here is this is then the current status on this pipe that's been aggregated, so we know, what the most recent data was, what the most recent lineage change is, and then also there's a column. So we've grouped on this pipe, there have been a lot of changes, and those are the two values that have been changed. And so your next question is, well, how do I actually see what exactly is changed and changed from what to what? So that's in this linked tab. So this is essentially a drill down into the archive history of all changes on this pipe. So I can go there and I can see here that for that given pipe, there's 40 different changes that have been made. And here it'll list them. And so, in Enlighten, if you have a one-to-many relationship on a link table, you can just drill down into this form. So here's the list of all changes. And you can sort it by whatever you want. But let's just take a look. So here, a user called H changed the end rim elevation here from this value to that value. Okay, and they changed the data source from a plan to a record drawing. It's on the same date. So probably these were there. We do track an archive ID, so we can look at that. There's a log ID, and then obviously there's a GID, and all of these would be related to that pipe's GID. So we know the entire history of this thing. So here, the gradient changed from this value to that value. And so if diameter had changed or anything else had changed, we would have a list of every single thing. There's also types of changes. An update would be an attribute. A spatial would be geometry. So here's where it would have moved and been changed. And so you can run through all 40 odd changes on this thing. So here, for example, it changed the diameter from 8 to 0, and then they changed their mind back to 8, and that happened all on the same day. So obviously it was busy editing and must have done an update and posted that. So the moment any post or change to the database, you'll see it here on this data set, right? Same thing on the nodes. So if I go onto a sewer node over there, I'm going to get a similar setup there. So that's essentially what happens and what you can see. So in this instance, on Enlighten here, I've been able to view who has changed what. You can also set up layer filters, so you can go in and actually see, what layers have changed for what, and you can go and track them, and I'd see if there's sewer pipe changes. So I can go and look at which column has changed here, and I could go and look at jurisdiction, lineage date, and pipe type, for example, and then I could show that on the map. So this is standard Enlighten functionality. All this is doing is drawing from a linked table that has all the history with the same GID of that asset. Those are all tables in the database. So obviously we've got all that data available. We can look at that in Power BI. So you can take Power BI and point it at those same tables. So this is really useful for looking at changes, where they are, who made them, filtering those and popping those up on the map, and you can look at it and you can slice and dice it, filter it down by certain date periods, and you'll see it on the map. Also, you can go to Power BI. With Munsys, we have a set of default Power BI templates. So these are actually templates. So all I did was load the lineage one here, and then that with Power BI gives you interactive graphs. So I'll go back to it. So here's live on their data, reading from the Munsys monitor table, And looking at the changes, we can go in and see and drill down. So here's this data. As I said, they had it from 2017 on Enlighten, we filtered it, but here's literally all of the changes. So in the last 7 odd years, they've made 400,000 changes on this data set, and we know exactly who did what they did, and how many of those changes were made. And you can then drill down standard Power BI stuff. So say I want to know, what did this user do since the last, let's see, we can slide this along. So here's a cumulative of this user. So they made, for that particular user, made just over 1,900 stormwater edits. And so this is changes by asset class. So this would be the stormwater sewer node. So they've been working on storm most recently. And in 2023, they made a lot of those changes there, and you can see it and ripple through as to what exactly those changes were. You can drill down further. You can look at, well, what were just data updates like that? And you can change it around. You see these are interactive. So here, for example, in this instance, they have a set of power users that use Enlighten, and they make updates. So I'll turn that off and show all the data. But let's go and turn on changes made by Enlighten. So in Enlighten, we've got a couple of thousand changes that were made in the last number of months here. And if we go back further, you can see there's, this has sort of been turned on in the last couple of years. And so you'll see then that, 2,500 sewer gravity pipe changes through Enlighten. And you can drill down. These are, it's the standard stuff you can slice and dice. We could also be showing the from and tos and all of that. But in essence, this is the visible part of what's changed where. Give it to me, and I can report on it. So it's in the database, standard things that we do on all kinds of reports you can report on it. So that's what we're doing and how we're doing that full transaction tracking, both spatial, both attribute, and link changes by user, by date. And so that's essentially that view. So over to you, Han, and we can carry on how do you actually set up, how does Lineage work, how do you configure it, and how do you get to what I've just visualized for you.
Thank you very much, Colin. Right, so that's the result of Lineage. So how does the Lineage work, actually? So let's go and have a look at that. So every entity in Munsys has a GID, or a geographic identifier. We then track the history of the changes based on new and changed data, so inserts, updates, and deletes. Now, what we're doing is when we create Lineage, we add two new columns to the table that we enable Lineage on. So it is a parent GID and a Lineage date. And so when we work then in the routines, we then go and update the whole parent, the whole Lineage history of that. So when you insert a new record, the parent GID is empty. So if you've got an empty parent GID, you know that this is a new record and that there is no update or delete history on that. It's a new record versus one that has got history in there. If you do any updates, it will then start to populate the lineage history. When we break a pipe, the old pipe is deleted and two new pipes are created. So what's the impact of that we're looking at? So the old pipe is then stored in an archive table and the transaction stored in the monitor log table. So practical reality, I've got a pipe, it's got a GID. If I then go and break that pipe, it creates two new pipes, so it's got two new GIDs, and we go and populate the parent GID of those two new pipes. So this is then sent to the archive table, so it's a delete transaction, but is then copied to the archive table before it is deleted from spatial table, and those two new records are inserted in the pipe tables. We now know this parent GID that exists in the archive table, what is that parent GID? Now the next option that we do is if we then look at how do we break the data. When we set up the lineage, there's different settings how we work with the data. So I'll just quickly go and have a look at that for you. So when we go and set up our lineage, and I go and look at my prompt behavior, we can say there's a continued automatic posting or a prompt. So I'll explain exactly how that works in the continue editing and what the implications of that would be. So if we go and look at to say I'm going to post the data, so I've got the GID, two new GIDs, I've got the parent GID in there. Now what happens if I, in an edit session, I go and break this one pipe and then I go and break one of the subsequent pipes before it has been posted to the database. So practically it will say I've got this pipe, so this is a 201, 202, the parent GID of both of those are 100, and I go and break this one, so I get two new GIDs, and that one would then have the parent of there. But if I then go and say that then goes into the archive table, so that is if I go and work with automated posting. If I use the continue setting, so that I will then have the entire history in that. So this one will tell us that the parent GID is this pipe, and then that pipe, that one has got the parent GID in there. The other option would be to say, okay, I create this, I then go and break those, but this only really existed in the edit session, so it never gets posted. So if I go and say, well, I don't really need that, then what we would have, the parent GID in the SP table, that one never gets into the spatial table. So with this one, I'll say that's the parent GID, and those ones get then the parent GID of 100 as well. So that is then sort of a different mechanism. Is it important to have the multiple breaks in the edit session for you, so you can have the, okay, this one was broken and this one is broken? Again, I'd say 90% of the time it's not going to be important to know that. So that's what we typically recommend in there. Now, you then have another one to say there's an option that you can prompt. If your end users know what they're doing, they can then go and decide which one do you want to do. Do I need to know the breaks in this edit session or not? What happens if I go and merge? So if I've got two pipes that I'm now going to merge, we do an update transaction. Now what it will do is the first pipe that you select when you do a merge, it will take the GID of that one and it will keep that, it will change the geometry and it will delete the second one. And in the second pipe that it's deleted, it will make the parent GID 101. So that's then the merge pipe, how that would work. So how do we set up? So you go into the Munsys Management Console, we go and enable Lineage on there. And so continue, like we've explained, it will continue the break operation without posting, and it will then not have that session pipes within the database. The automatic posting will then go and post all of those changes to the database, so you've got the entire history if that is something that you want. Prompt behavior, which one do you want to choose within your editing session. So you then go into the lineage, add it into a SP table. Now this is an older one, so I'll actually go into, and we've had one or two updates in there. All right, so let's go and have a look at this. So here I've got lineage on a spatial table. So what I'm going to do is to say, let's go and add lineage on a table. You go and select, and so I'm going to select your stormwater pipe or drainage pipe. Now you've got monitor section and an archive section. So what we've got a Munsys monitor log table, and the monitor section will handle how that gets updated. Insert, update, and delete operations, and log spatial updates explicitly. And then in the archive section, you can do archive on update operations, on delete operations. So if you only want the deleted information, you can turn this off. The other option is log attribute changes. So that is with the schematic. So that's in the AD log table where you can then go and change the information in there. So basically what this is doing, if I go and create a lineage, it will create MMA triggers, so it will then log insert, update and delete operation, MMS, spatial updates, and then the MARC is the archive changes. So it will go and create all of those triggers. It will then also add information into the Munsys monitor log. So it is an insert, update, spatial and attribute and delete operations. Recorded, it create a AD table. So if it's a SP watt pipe, it will create the SPAD watt pipe, and then a SPAD log for watt pipe that it will go and do. Now it will create the Munsys SP tables and SP columns to say here's a new table. It will create a Munsys query for the archive table. It creates entries in the MDSys user SGL metadata. It creates the link template in Munsys automatically for you to go and populate that. Now the next component is then how do we get this AD log? Is to Munsys schedule task. So in Munsys Management Console, it then creates an Oracle job in the database package. And what that will do is enable the schedule task. And you can then go and add the scheduled task. So there's a number of these. It's a procedure. And so that is AD log is the one. It's the lineage enhancement. There's a few more: populate flow direction symbols, clean up integrity results, copying attributes, and so on. So the important one there is the log attribute changes to a related table. Log attribute changes, so that would then enable that. So it adds a Munsys scheduled task and a table per SP table, so it will create those tables for you. And what that then does, whenever you run that, it will go and look at those changes. So in this AD log table, it will then tell you, yes, all the changes. So it will actually look at the first run. It will look at the entire history of the SP table and the SPAD table, compare the differences in attribute and go and put it in the AD log table, and then store the run date. On the next run, it will only look at the changes in between the last run and this run, and only then do the updates for that. So that we'll have a look at. So let's go and have a look back at the lineage. So if I go into this one, I'm going to create this information. Now you've got the options to say I want all columns or I want specific columns. If I go and do all columns, you can do that. Now the question is, when would you do specific columns? So if you say, well, I don't really want changes in my tag X and tag Y and size and justification and angle and those type of things. I don't want changes on that monitored. So let's just go and say geom length. We may want to do that as well. So let's go and copy those, and I'm going to exclude those tables. So in the trigger, it will then not include the information in there. So what I'll do is let's go and create that. And so now what has happened? So it now refreshes my information in there. So if we look at for the SW pipe, it's now created those three triggers within the database. If I now go and look at my spatial tables, what we will see, it's now gone and created the SPADS SW pipe table. So it's created that table from us that we can have a look at. If we go and look at my indices on it, SP SW pipe, so it created a geometry index, a GID, and on the index on the archive that it has, and then also populated all the views, etc. in there. So if I go, let's go and look at, I'll go to my drainage, and let's go and query. Let's go and query it in this area. So it'll be a bit too much, but that's all fine. Okay. So now there's a drainage pipe that it has created. So it now created the trigger. So if I look at, here's all my attributes in there. Now, what we'll see if I go and look at my templates, my linked attributes, it now created a linked archive data, lineage attribute changes. Now that's not populated because it hasn't run yet, because we've just created. What is the lineage history? Obviously, there won't be anything in there at the moment. So if I go and say, let's go in here and I'll go and change my attributes. And what I'll do is to say, let's go and I'll change the data quality to say that's approximate. What we'll also see, there's no entries in there. There's no parent GID because I just created the lineage on that. So let me go and update that, post that to the database. And I now can go and look at, so there's my data quality. If I now go and look at my attributes, what we'll also see is, so the parent GID has not been populated, but the lineage data has been populated. So the reason why the lineage parent GID hasn't been populated, because that one hasn't broken, but there is lineage updates in there. So if I then go and look at my history to say, okay, that one was, so this will give us the information in the Munsys monitor log table to say, okay, this was updated by this user on this date, and there isn't a parent for that. If I look at the attribute changes, this would not be logged in here because that will run then at the next change. And then if we look at, here's the archive data, so there you can see that data quality is not populated and the data quality is populated in here. So there's quite a lot of footwork that's going on behind the scenes to actually go and populate and build all of the information in there that we can then use. So it's quite important to not try and do all of this manually because there's quite a lot of things going on in the background. Now, the next thing that I would then like to look at is, in terms of the setup, what's some of the issues that you need to consider? So if we look at, we've now created a table, we've worked around all of these issues. So if I now go back to my Munsys environment, if I now go and say, all right, I now want to go and update my table, and I now want to say on my stormwater pipe, go and add a new attribute or delete a new attribute. Now, remember, we've gone in our lineage, we've said these are my columns that I'm now going to modify. So if I add a new column and I haven't added all columns, it's not going to pick that up. So if I'm going to add a new column in here, it's going to say, well, okay, I'm not monitoring this. So you would need to go and update your Munsys monitor log information to reflect that information. The next thing then is to say, if I'm going to remove a specific attribute, so if I want to, I've added a custom attribute that I now want to go and remove. Now what happens then, I may have records in the lineage about that specific attribute. So by default, it's not going to allow you to remove the table because that's now going to update, it's now going to change the lineage. So you have to then decide, how do we want to go and modify my lineage? So do I want to go and totally remove all of that information out of the lineage table, or do I want to keep it there because it's now modified, it's a different table structure? So what we'll do is there is that then has to become a manual process to, how do I want to update my trigger, etc. So there's some decisions to be made. So we've got mechanisms how to do that, to update those type of processes that we would need to look at. So in terms of the user interface, if I go and modify that, you have to be a little bit careful within that. The next thing is, do I clean up history after a time to say, okay, after 2 years, I'm not going to worry about it in there? My recommendation is not to do that. Why would you want to remove your history over time? Store it, it's cheap, it's relatively little data, so I wouldn't recommend going cleaning up data on there. Building an entire history is advantageous to see, this is the entire history over time that we've had, how much changes have we had. if you're going to do that in your planning process going to forward, it's quite important to have that history across the entire data set. So yeah, changes data model has to take lineage into account, that you have to look at with adding columns. Now, where do we use lineage? Integration to other systems, so your asset management is quite an important process. So in here, if we look at what we have with the lineage, we can know when has the asset been created, when has it been modified, when do I split an asset, when do I merge an asset, etc. So when you do an integration to an asset management system, it's quite important to know these things because I may have maintenance history on that asset. So now I go and split that pipe. Now the maintenance history now, on which pipe does it go? What's the history? So we say, yes, now a new pipe that we've created and it is the old one, yes, the two that we've deleted. So if there's maintenance history on the old one, that has to be transferred in the asset management to the new system. The other component is to say we've now broken these two pipes. Here's the new one. They've got different geometry lengths. What am I going to do with the cost structures on that? It's now new pipe length, etc. What's the financial impact, which is also then different to that? How do I want to do my asset revaluation on those issues? So it's quite important then in terms of your management with the lineage on the asset management to cater for that. So we can tell you exactly, yes, all my insert, my updates, my deletes, yes, the changes that we send to the asset management system, but it's important to, from an asset management perspective, that they have mechanisms in place to manage that information for those changes. You cannot just go and say, okay, I've now created, I've passed it on to the asset management system, it's now their problem. Those changes that happens in the GIS with updates and deletes has to be managed in the overall process. So we've got the reporting in the Munsys management console. So if I go back to that, if I then look at here's all my reports in Munsys management console, there's a whole heap of them. So the total number of records in my lineage in the 24 hours for the past week, month, group by operation, username, month, table name, month, and operation. Now, if we look at any of these, I can go and look at, this is the actual SQL that we are running that you can go and do. It will tell you whether this is a valid SQL statement. Now, what it means, I can also go in here and go and add my own reports. And is it a monitor? Is it a usage report? What is the SQL? So if you write your own SQL, you can actually go and add your own reporting in here as well. But it's given us quite a bit of, so here, shared user, same name from different machines, etc. So if I go and run that report, it will then tell you that here's all these, the machine names and the logon date with these usernames that has been logged on to the information group by month and operation. Let's run that report. So there you can actually see the insert and update and deletes, etc. All the reports that is available to you. So that is the quick run through on Munsys Lineage. What is the importance in there? What is the type of reports that we have, etc., that you can then look at within the lineage, how we can then expose that into Enlighten as well. Have we got any questions?
Johan, one that comes up is when folks, if they're doing a blanket update across the entire data set, sometimes they may decide, you know what, we're going to make the tag size just a fraction bigger. And they don't
Yes.
really care about that. Sometimes it's really useful to go and disable the trigger. Typically, if you're doing like a SQL backend sort of big update, you can temporarily just disable that trigger, run the change, and then turn it back on. Because that's usually, we found, that adds, like a whole data set, thousands at a time of
Yes.
records, and it bloats your lineage big time. And so you can just go in here and disable those triggers on that feature. go run your SQL, come back, turn it on. It's a very admin kind of thing, but it's very useful to know
Yes,
that
and
that's
then go
a
and enable that.
decent
So there's two
workflow.
ways of doing it sometimes. So for example, where we're doing things like there's now a projection change or the data, yeah, so let's say we're doing something around the projection change. Now you've got two options is to say, well, we're now changing a projection. Do we just disable all the triggers and then enable it afterwards? So there's no population of all of that in the database, or is it also important to know that? So then typically what you can do is to say, let's go and create a separate user within the Munsys Management Console. We then run that process as that user. So we now know that this is a GDA 2020 update user, and the only changes within the database was then for that user. So then in your reporting, you can decide then, do you want to include or exclude that specific user for that change within the database?
Mm-hmm.
That you can. So you've got options how you want to handle that. Part of the scheduled tasks as well when we go and work at that. So if we look at here is this, that's the new scheduled task that was created. Now, when we do this scheduled task, you also have an option to say in a process, when you run this, go and disable a trigger, and at the end of it, go and enable a trigger. And so in here, do you want to run it daily, weekly, monthly? Is it enabled? So you can go and modify any of these tasks, etc. So when that's just that one tick box would automatically enable the scheduled task and when it's running, etc.
There was another question. Actually, it was the stuff I was showing in Enlighten there, and that is to add your own queries, Munsys queries, so that you can query into Munsys, return just in the query palette. You can return, changes done by a given user or in a certain date range and pull them into Munsys as well. It's essentially the same as what Enlighten is. So in Enlighten, it's a canned layer that's there, and you can only apply a filter to it. But in here, there are those lineage queries, but you can also, you can go make your own ones. It's just a link between different tables. You can set that up and pull that in. So say somebody said, oh, we want to know where all the major pipes were that were changed in the last 2 years. You can go into Munsys or whatever and set a date range and a type and, link that table to the lineage tables and do that sort of stuff. So you can do that in
Yes.
Munsys as well. And
Yeah.
then
So
save
if
that
I go
query and
and
then
look at
next time.
my properties there, so what this is done is then, so this is in the AD water pipe. Go and just query the data there, and this is then okay. That was just the
Mhm.
update, and yeah, just go and modify the information. Now you can also go and link this to the Munsys monitor log table or to the SPAD table, so you can go and say, yeah, show me all the pipes where there has been
Mhm.
update, show me all the actual archive data. So this is if I want to
Mhm.
bring out the original data in there, I can do that and query that
Yeah, I
out.
mean, it's different ways of slicing and dicing, essentially the same thing. But it's nice in Munsys because you can pull it into the screen, and then you can literally select those spatially by. Sometimes you want to know, oh, in this basin or in this district or in this suburb or whatever, and you can select those. And then in Munsys, of course, once it's there, you can do a report and push out any of that stuff. So same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so one
Good.
of the things that I can do as well is to say, all right, if I've modified the geometry of something and it's now been updated, etc., and I found that that was a mistake, what I can do is go to my lineage query, go and query out the updated and deleted object, and then go to my object and to say, on my edit mun line, I can go and do the replace geometry. So I can then go and say on the new one, go and replace the geometry, go and pick the old one and turn it back. So if I want to just from the archive go and replace or get back to that one, that's just an easy
Hmm.
way to actually go and update that. but that will then also keep the entire history for that you know that, okay, this is now, I've rolled that one back. So it's not, it's with this new GID, yes, the geometry, etc., that it is. So it's not going to delete the new pipe and doing it. It just gives you a way to actually keep track of exactly what is happening, so you can have a look at the information on there.
Yeah, so that's the other part which is implicit in what you just said, and that is sometimes you want to see on a map, show me where it used to be and where it is now, and I can, just by running those queries with the filters, you can, because the archive delete table does actually store a copy of the
Correct.
geometry of the feature. So we have the whole thing, it's still there. You can roll it back to a given time. So you've got all that timeline in there as well. Okay, good.
Mm. One of the other ones before we close off is the use in shut-off blocks. Now, shut-off blocks in Enlighten, we've got with a network trace, what you'll see there's a tick box to say a pre-calculated network trace. So with the shut-off blocks, part of that process is we run a network trace and then look at all of these process and then do calculate all the network trace. So if I look at these 4 pipes consist a shut-off block, we then combine all of those and go and store that in specific tables in the database. Now, what we then do is to say that can be quite a lengthy process to run if you need to do it across the entire network. We then use the lineage to say, okay, the last time I ran my shut-off block process was, a week ago, and now I want to run this again. We then go and look at, only show me the inserts, updates, and deletes for that period, and it will only go and update those shut-off blocks. So we'll go and recalculate those shut-off blocks for you using the information within the lineage. And that speeds up the whole network trace process. And in terms of displaying the shut-off blocks and what's all the impact, so show me all the large shut-off blocks, etc. That's also quite an important process to have and to look at within the entire process. All the default queries, when you do that with the reporting, and then the monitor log, and your own custom queries that you can go and add. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.